thank you for asking that. Barrow Cadbury Trust has been interested in young people and young lives for a significant amount of its history. But in early 2000, it convened a group of like-minded organisations which really wanted to think about how young people were treated in society, how young people were treated in society. So they got together and really thought about some of the key issues. And one of the issues they found was this transition into adulthood. So it developed the report Lost in Transition, really thinking about that period in young people's lives. And it came to the conclusion that there was a real steep drop-off in services. And this drop-off in services, this cliff edge, was particularly acute in the criminal justice system. So later on, it convened the Transition to Adulthood Alliance. And here, a range of different organisations which are interested in criminal justice and also interested in young people got together to really think about how we can make an impact to support young adults as they move from childhood into adulthood, and the work that we needed to do to support young adults. So we've supported, the Barrow Cadbury Trust has supported these organisations to think and research and to make and to campaign on behalf of young people. Thank you, Mark. I think we can characterise T2A's development into three distinct stages. First was building the evidence base. So what does neurology, what does criminology, what does psychology tell us about young adults at this stage? And then we can move through into making a case. Who needs to know about this, about our research? And then in our current phase, it's about embedding that knowledge with practitioners, people that work one-to-one with young adults. So if you first look at building the evidence base, the Trust commissioned a range of organisations to do research, conduct research about young adults. And they really came back and told us about young adults developing psychosocial maturity, thinking about their temperance, about managing impulse control, thinking about taking responsibility for their behaviour and how those facets develop over time, and also thinking about perspective, that is long-term considerations and wider impacts of behaviour. All of this research came together in a publication that we worked with the University of Birmingham. So really bringing it all together. And then once we created this evidence base, we could really go out and start to make the case for change. So we have what we call a pathways model. So that's looking at key points in the justice system. So we have a 10-point pathway model, but it really starts with policing and arrest, moving through to prosecution, sentencing, and then prisons and probation. So at each one of these points, we say that you can have a distinct service for young adults. And in our publication, Pathways from Crime, we set out a range of different interventions that different agencies working at these key points can do to support young adults. But they all have a range of things in common, and that is for the service to be flexible and responsive, for staff to have knowledge about continuing maturity and where young adults are in their lives, and to enable those professionals to build up important and ongoing relationships with the young person and support their development. And like the youth justice system, to really bring together multiple agencies to really meet the needs of those young people who are often in trouble and are often vulnerable. So we brought all this together, but we thought about who needs to know about this information. So, for want of a better term, we took this body of evidence to the top of the justice system. And this is where I'll bring in my colleague Gemma Buckland to talk about the work we did with the Justice Select Committee and with the with key judicial agencies.
Thank you, Laurie. So I am now T2A's Policy and Public Affairs lead. However, in a previous role, I worked for the Justice Select Committee, and in 2016, the Justice Select Committee started becoming aware of this evidence and felt compelled enough by it to undertake an inquiry. So that means that they looked in depth at this issue and they made a series of recommendations about what they thought should happen based on the evidence and what they heard about what was currently happening to embed it into the system. So they were compelled by the strength of the evidence, and they developed something that they called a blueprint, which was an outline of a framework for what they thought needed to happen in terms of a strategic approach to treating young adults in the criminal justice system in a distinct manner, as the evidence suggested needed to happen. So the committee actually undertook 2 inquiries on the subject. The first one took about a year, and as I said, they developed this blueprint, and their recommendation was that the government should take this blueprint and develop it into a strategic approach. So that would look at primarily what probation services and prison services and the courts needed to do in order to develop distinct approaches towards young adults. And that included training, as Laurie's mentioned, it included awareness raising, it included assessing maturity, and then it included looking at what pathways or interventions might need to happen to ensure that young adults are treated in a distinct manner. The Justice Select Committee was not very impressed with the government's response, I think it's safe to say. And a couple of years later, in 2018, they returned to the report and looked at what had happened in terms of implementing the recommendations that the committee had made. The government should respond to those recommendations, but it's not necessarily compelled to put them into practice. However, the committee was sufficiently concerned that they issued a further report, basically saying that there needed to be more progress on this and that they were disappointed with what had happened. And happily, since then, there has been significant progress. So just to mention a few of the things that have happened, there was a judgment, R.V. Clark in 2018, which basically, in terms of case law, demonstrated that maturity needed to be taken into account in sentencing. And this has been reflected in guidance for Crown prosecutors and also in sentencing council guidelines, where there's an extended explanation about the need to take young adults into account. And actually, the Sentencing Council has recently revisited this and is minded to strengthen that guidance. So that's, and then H&PPS has also developed a strategy, which is looking at the prison service, and a framework has been developed for probation services as well.
Thank you, Gemma. So that was the making the case stage. So really getting this information that T2A and the Alliance members had collected to the right people and right places in the justice system. But one of the key places that should be aware of this information about young adults and their ongoing maturity are the practitioners that support young adults. So T2A has commissioned a range of guidance materials. So, for example, using an identity lens. But also, it's really important that the voices of young adults, those that have been through the justice system, are also taken into account. So T2A has been working with Leaders Unlocked, and their Young Justice Advisors Group has produced a couple of reports really thinking about issues that impact them. So thinking about mental health, thinking about care experience, and also producing a range of recommendations which they think are really important in terms of how they are supported in the justice system. So, but it's not only the work of T2A. I show here a couple of examples of work that H&PPS has been doing. So they have been thinking about psychosocial maturity, thinking about, in this example here, young adult male offenders, and they've produced a number of tools and guidance for prison and probation staff. So they've produced a model of operational delivery for prisons which hold young adults. And there's an executive director who's in his brief. He's a strategic lead for young adults. They produced an assessment tool for judging maturity. And should you should they at all judge that you have low maturity, they've developed a short program called Choices and Changes to help prison staff really get that young adult thinking about where they are and their different perspectives that they have. And it's really good because they hold quarterly meetings, which they can bring together a range of different teams across a very big organisation to talk about the work that they're doing to support young adults. So really good work that has been done, but there's also a lot more that can be done. So I'm going to hand back to Gemma to talk about some ongoing projects and some pilot projects that have taken place that really bring together a lot of the learning from T2A.
Thank you very much, Laurie. So this is one example of a project which is seeking to embed the evidence base. So in Greater Manchester, Merseyside and Cheshire, the regional prison director took the view that there needed to be a clear focus on young adults, and has set up a project that is prison service facing outwards, and tried to set up a partnership that enables young adults to be looked at across the region. So we've put here the aim of that project and some of its objectives, but it was a very wide-ranging project. It had a wide number of work streams. The core of that was to try to think about how to shift a young person's identity from towards a pro-social identity, which we'll talk a bit more about in a second, and to think about how to embed that across a number of work streams. So that might include, how do you think about this when you're looking at family engagement, for example, or how do you think about this when you're sentence planning and thinking about case management, and how do you think about it when you are looking at accommodation needs. And another strand of that project, as well as looking at how to shift identity, was really seeking to understand from young adults' perspectives across the range of work streams what their needs were. So the people working on the project worked very closely with an organisation that was able to go and speak extensively to young adults, with people with lived experience, about what they wanted to see, how they wanted the system to change. And they have also set in train a number of examples of projects that they are co-producing with young adults to with a kind of health and well-being perspective, to ensure that young adults are involved in some of the learning and some of the future direction of practice. And that includes, for example, health mentors, so young adults being trained to support their fellow young adults in relation to kind of health, diet, exercise and things like that, for example. I'm going to hand over to Laurie now. Oh, no, I'm not. So one of the things that the project is focused on throughout is how you might make sure that practitioners are focused on young adults' identity. So Laurie previously mentioned a report called Using an Identity Lens, which was produced by NACRO. Professor Neil Hazel, who was involved in the development of that report, has been extensively involved in the Greater Manchester project. And one of the things that he's been trying to do is think about, how do you implement the evidence around how you need to shift identity in order to support young adults to desist from crime. How do you embed that into practical approaches for professionals to use? So that has included, for example, as I mentioned, looking at sentence planning, looking at how you might map identity or considerations around identity onto OASIS. And he's proposed that there are kind of 4 key questions that professionals can ask if they want to guide young adults' identity development. So those include, what is the young adult's identity and what elements of it allow offending? So that's a kind of backwards looking question. And then the aim is to try to look forwards and think about what the young adult's strengths are, what are their interests, what are their goals, and how can that help inform a pro-social identity. So what are the sorts of things that they might be demonstrating some kind of leadership in or interest in, or are they playing a particular role in their family, for example? or in caring for their child, or something like that, where you can try to foster that element of their identity and encourage them to look forward. So the third question is around what pro-social future self can a young adult develop? And then finally, thinking about what the routes are that you might be able to support a young adult with in terms of moving forwards to their pro-social self. So I'd really encourage you to look at the report that's been produced using an identity lens, and also to follow the work that Professor Neil Hazel is doing now to try to embed that in various ways in probation and prison practice.
Thank you, Gemma. So Gemma's spoken about some of the support and sort of theoretical support that's available for young adults. Let me just tell you quickly about a pilot project taking place in the London Borough of Newham. It's sort of supported by the Mayor of London and the Office for Policing and Crime. So this is a hub. It's a multidisciplinary hub where young adults on probation can go to have their probation appointments, but also have a conversation about their needs. And if necessary, they can be referred to a range of services inside the building. For example, speech and language therapy, mental health support, peer mentoring, and also there's accommodation support and also education and work support there as well. So really thinking about that youth justice model, bringing a service together, thinking about relationships and thinking about the best way to make sure that the young adult is really close to the services that can make a difference to some parts of their lives. We should also say that there's a range of different guides, and these are range for probation officers to think about young adults. So these are all on our website, and I'll give you the website details in the last slide. But there's a range of different support material that we think would be useful for probation practitioners, for example, but also they can be used by a range of people who work closely with young adults. So there's some examples there. So we're coming up to the end of the seminar, the webinar now. I'll leave you with this slide. Please do go to our website, www.t2a.org.uk. Have a look at this materials we've got on there. There's a whole range of materials there, thinking about neurodiversity, thinking about gender and race, thinking about young adults' needs. So please do have a look at our website, but also follow us on Twitter and follow us on LinkedIn as well. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.